In the old part of the Spanish city of Cádiz there is a house called House of Mirrors. This is an impressive three-story mansion with elegant architecture, in the style of old Spain. But the beautiful architecture of the house is deceptive, because in Cádiz everyone believes that a ghost lives in this house, and they know the history of the mansion. At night, the locals stay away from this place. Legend has it that many years ago, a famous Spanish admiral lived in this house with his wife and young daughter. Being an admiral meant that he often had to leave home for a long time and travel from port to port. During these trips, the admiral visited many different exotic countries. It is said that the admiral loved and cherished his beautiful daughter more than life. Whenever he went on another voyage, his daughter said goodbye to him with tears in her eyes. She missed him more than anyone in this world. His daughter collected mirrors, so, as a sign of his deep affection for her, every time he returned from one of his trips, he brought her a new mirror as a gift. As the years passed, the house was filled more and more with new beautiful and exquisite mirrors. The girl loved to walk around the house and look at her reflection in the mirrors. Her father often boasted to his friends and colleagues that his daughter was the most beautiful girl in Cádiz. Over the years, the admiral's wife has aged and lost her former beauty. She began to hate her reflection in the mirror, and began to be very jealous of her husband's daughter. Gradually, the woman fell into a deep depression, and her hatred for her daughter became stronger and stronger. Squabbles and quarrels began to break out more and more often between mother and daughter, and they became even more bitter during the admiral's absence. The relationship between mother and daughter was finally spoiled by the mother's secret hatred. She became convinced that her husband loves their daughter much more than when he loved her. Blinded by jealousy, he began to hatch a cruel plan of revenge. One day, when the admiral went on a trip again, his wife had the opportunity to carry out her diabolical plan. She put poison in her daughter's drink. The daughter drank poison and was ill for several days. Blood flowed from her eyes and mouth, and then she fell into a coma and died. The mother was sure that with the death of her daughter, she and her husband would be able to restore their previous relationship. The father returned a week later, and was met at the door by his wife. She calmly informed him that their daughter had contracted a terrible disease and died during his absence. After hearing the terrible news, the man burst into tears. He was completely devastated and spent the next few days, sitting in her daughter's bedroom, clutching her head and crying bitterly. Late at night, when my father was wiping tears from his eyes, he looked at one of the mirrors that hung on the wall in the bedroom. What he saw made him tremble with fear. In the mirror, there was a ghostly figure of his beloved child. A shocking scene began to unfold in the mirror. His daughter was sending him a message from the other world that I am the reflection of the mirror. He saw how his wife poisoned the drink and gave it to her daughter. He saw his daughter lying in bed, and blood was flowing from her eyes and mouth, and she was screaming in pain, and on the side by the bed his wife was quietly gloating. The sight of his beloved child struggling in agony was unbearable. The shocked husband, to whom the whole truth was revealed, in a rage, ran to his wife, and grabbed her by the hand. He forced her to confess to the crime, and took her to the police. The woman was convicted of murdering her daughter, and she spent the rest of her days alone, behind the bars of a dirty prison cell. The father never recovered from the death of his only daughter. He just couldn't live in the house where she was so brutally murdered. Each mirror reminded him of his daughter's beauty, and he could not overcome the pain of his loss. He left Cádiz and moved to another city, trying to forget his past. The house remained abandoned for several decades, until now the walls in it are covered with mirrors. People who lived nearby claimed that late at night, they heard screams coming from the old building. They said that these screams were similar to the screams of a young girl. There were daredevils who entered the house to see where the screams were coming from. The noise seemed to come from the upper floor. They could hear the pitiful crying of a young girl piercing the silence of the night. The screams were so strange that it seemed as if they were reflected from mirrors, as if the sounds were coming directly from them. One curious and careless person accidentally broke one of the mirrors. They say that when he took one of the fragments and looked into it, his face was not reflected there. Instead of his reflection, he was horrified to see a dead girl. Her face expressed such anger that goosebumps ran down his back, and he ran out of the house screaming. Others who visited the house also stated that they saw a girl out of the corner of their eyes who was watching them from the mirrors. Some, terrified, ran away from home, believing that they were very lucky to be alive. As the years passed, the story of the House of Mirrors began to spread from Cadiz to the rest of Spain. The legend became so famous that many teenagers came from afar to explore the old, dilapidated building at night. Most of them wanted to test their courage and make sure whether the reflection of the murdered girl could really be seen in the mirrors. Several young people began to organize trips to the old mansion. They are holding a contest to see who can hold out in the ghost mansion the most. They say that after spending a few minutes in the mansion, none of you will dare to enter there a second time. The Red House in Pasir Ris Park has been abandoned for decades, and is still abandoned. The gate is closed with a rusty lock, and there is a sign on it that says, "Private property, no trespassing." The entrance to the house is guarded by two stone statues of Chinese lions. For many years there have been rumors in Singapore that this house is cursed. Teenagers often sneak into the house at night to wander around in it and tickle their nerves. For many young people, visiting the Red House is something of a test of their courage. No one knows exactly what happened in the Red House that caused his curse, but, according to legend, there has been a real mass murder more than once. During the Second World War, the building was either a nursery or a child care center. When the Japanese invaded Singapore, the residents of the house were brutally murdered. Some teachers and children were burned alive. They say that if you look closely, you can still see the charred prints of burned bodies on the walls inside the building. Years later, the Red House turned into an ordinary apartment building and a family settled in it. They say that the husband killed his wife and children, and then burned their bodies under a tree in the courtyard. After that, the ghost of the wife returned and killed the husband. Since then, the ghosts of the people who died in this house have not found peace. According to legend, if you come to the Red House after midnight, the stone lions that guard the entrance to the building will turn their heads and look at you when you pass by. Some people, before entering the house, light a cigarette and put it in the lions' mouths. They say that if you have done this, you need to leave the house before the cigarette burns out. Lions stand close to the gate, so people, climbing over the entrance gate, often step on the lions' heads. In this case, you must apologize to Leo, or something terrible will happen to you. They also say that you cannot enter the house in any red clothes. In addition, there is an opinion that you can enter the house in groups with an even number of people. If an odd number of people come into the house, then if you look at the shadows, you can notice another shadow, with his hands raised above his head. Inside the Red House is very dark and dirty. There is a rocking chair with a doll sitting in it. They say that the chair swings by itself. Some people claim that the doll's eyes burn red in the dark. Others claim to have seen the doll wiping bloody tears from her face. If you dare to remove the doll from the chair, you will hear a child crying or even screaming. There are also many reports that sinister laughter was heard in the house. According to legend, 3 ghosts settled in the house: a woman with a red lantern, a boy, and a girl. This is a murdered mother and her 2 children. Most often these ghosts are seen at a large, old tree behind the house. Sometimes people see only white shadows. They say that before entering the house, if you want to protect yourself, you need to light an incense stick and pray in front of the house. Then you have to throw 2 coins and ask for permission to enter. If 1 heads and 1 tails fall out, it means that you can go inside. Many people begin to experience problems after visiting the house. Some have a fever or severe pain in the neck. Others have nightmares and wake up in a cold sweat. 2 teenagers, having left the house, began to climb over the fence and caught on the barbed wire, severely injuring themselves. Still, after climbing over the fence, they very carefully washed away all the blood stains left behind them, so it is believed that everything bad that is in the house can haunt you and find traces of blood. One night, a group of 20 teenagers went to the red house. They decided to climb over the gate, but one boy did not know about the stone lions and stepped on one of them on the head without apologizing. Once in the house, his friends asked him if he was all right, and the boy replied, "Yes, of course. I feel great." As soon as he said that, blood started flowing from his mouth. When the teenagers left the house, the blood stopped immediately, but the teenagers noticed that the lions' heads were now turned in the other direction. A month later, a terrible tragedy happened to that boy. A lamppost suddenly fell right on his head. The boy was taken to the hospital, and he died at about the same time when he stepped on the lion's head. When other teenagers examined the house, they noticed that the sky began to turn red. A few people went to the backyard and saw something shiny in the grass. Coming closer and parting the grass, they saw that it was the upper part of the coffin with a metal plate, indicating the name and date of death. Another girl, when she went to the red house with friends, stepped on the head of a stone lion without apologizing. One of the guys told her to ask Leo for forgiveness, but the girl on the contrary muttered something disrespectful to the lions. The teenagers went inside and began to explore the building. At first everything was fine, but then the girl somehow calmed down. Friends suggested that she was just scared, or she was tired, but the girl suddenly fainted, and friends had to drag her back on themselves. When they brought the girl to their cottage, she suddenly began to tremble and shake, as if she had a seizure. The girl was completely out of control. She was screaming and banging her head against the wall. One guy immediately ordered the others to hold her, and he started shouting for the evil spirit that possessed her to get away. However, the girl's screams only got louder. The guy began to pray, sprinkling the girl's face with some water and sprinkling leaves. Friends prayed furiously over the girl all night. Before sunrise, the girl woke up, but said she didn't remember anything. The guy said that she offended the evil that was in the house. She angered the spirits, and they decided to teach her a lesson. A few more boys entered the courtyard of the red house, but they were too scared and did not dare to go inside. A cold wind was blowing and there was an unnatural silence. All the guys had a terrible feeling of danger inside, from which the hairs on their heads stood on end. And at that moment the guys saw in the dark a black figure that was standing in one of the windows of the house. The eyes of this figure were burning with red flames, and she had black, long hair. It was a woman, and she just stood there and looked at them. Then she raised her hand and began beckoning them to her, with a terrible smile on her face. The boys didn't want to go into the house, but they couldn't resist. They were saved by the sound of a passing police car. The boys seemed to wake up and ran away.